There are names in history that shake the world. Kings who built empires, generals who led armies across deserts and seas, people whose stories fill hundreds of pages. But sometimes in the pages of divine revelation, we come across something entirely different. A name appears only briefly, just a few lines with no long story, no battles recorded, and yet the presence of that name has made scholars reflect for centuries. Imagine something like this. In the Quran, when Allah mentions the great figures in the history of faith, familiar names appear, names every believer recognizes. Then suddenly among those great names there appears a name that many people have barely heard before. There is no long introduction, no detailed biography, only a name placed among figures who shaped the history of humanity itself. That name is Dhul-Kifl. And what makes this story special is not what the Quran says about him, but what the Quran does not say. There is no chapter telling the story of his childhood. There is no account of him leading a people out of oppression. There is no miracle recorded in which a sea is split apart or a fire turns cool. All we have are a few short verses, yet those verses place him beside people known throughout the world. When the Quran mentions Ismail and Idris and then mentions Dhul-Kifl in the same line, many scholars immediately stop and reflect. Because Allah does not place names side by side without meaning. Every placement in the Quran carries depth. So the question begins to rise. Who was Dhul-Kifl? Was he a prophet, someone sent by Allah to a community? Or was he simply an ordinary man whose integrity was so great that Allah wanted his name to remain as a lesson for every generation that came after him? For centuries, scholars have tried to answer that question. Some believed he must have been a prophet because Allah would not place an ordinary man beside such great prophets. Scholars such as Ibn Kathir viewed the very placement of his name in the Quran as a strong indication. But other scholars saw the story differently. They said Dhul-Kifl may not have been a prophet. Perhaps he was only a righteous man whose life was never recorded in detail by history. Yet what made him extraordinary was the quality of his heart. A heart so patient that Allah mentioned him in the Quran as an example. Perhaps that is exactly what makes his story so remarkable. He is in a world where people often think their value is measured by fame, by power, or by victories others can see. The story of Dhul-Kifl says the opposite. There are people the world does not know, but heaven knows them. There are people who never build monuments, but their names are written into Revelation. Allah describes Dhul-Kifl with two short phrases that carry great weight. He calls him one of the patient and one of the best among his servants. These are not small descriptions. In Islamic tradition, patience does not simply mean enduring hardship. Patience is the ability to control yourself when your emotions want to explode. It is the ability to keep the heart calm when the world around you tries to pull it into chaos. A person who reaches that level is not merely strong. That is a person who has learned how to conquer himself. And that very quality made the life of Dhul-Kifl something that even the oldest enemy of humanity could not ignore. There is a being who has watched humanity since the dawn of history. A being who has seen mighty kings fall because of greed, great nations collapse because of arrogance, and countless people defeated by their own emotions. That being is Iblis. And when a man appears, a man who declares that he will control his anger and keep his promise to Allah no matter what happens, Iblis knows this is not an ordinary human being. This is a test. But what Iblis does not yet know is that this test will become one of his most bitter defeats. Before we step into that extraordinary story, welcome to Prophetic History Explained, where we explore the deepest stories from the history of faith, in stories that do not only recount the past, but help us better understand our own lives today. If you enjoy content like this, take a second to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained. Your support is what helps this channel continue bringing more meaningful and thoughtful stories in the videos ahead. Because the story you are about to hear is not only the story of a man from the past, it is the story of a battle every human being must face. The battle with the self. In every age of human history, there are moments when the future of an entire community depends on a single decision. It happens when an aging leader realizes that his time in this world is slowly coming to an end. And the greatest question is no longer what he has accomplished, but who will carry the path forward after he is gone. In the time of Dhul-Kifl, such a moment arrived. The leader of that community had spent his life guiding people. He listened to their disputes, settled injustice among them, and tried to keep society on the path of righteousness. But the passing years had made his body weak. Long nights of prayer had bent his back, and long days of judgment had wearied his eyes. He understood that the responsibility he carried could not simply be handed to just anyone. Power may cause many people to step forward, but true responsibility often makes people step back. So he decided to set a test not meant to find the strongest man, but to find the one who could master himself. One day he gathered the people before him. Silence covered the crowd as he stood before them. Everyone present understood that what he was about to say would shape the future of their community. And he said that he was looking for someone to succeed him, but that person would have to accept 3 conditions. The first condition was enough to make many lower their eyes and think. That person had to control his anger. Not simply try not to be angry, but refuse to let anger control any of his decisions. A leader who allows emotion to erupt can destroy justice in a single moment. The second condition was that he must rise for prayer throughout the night, not only when it was convenient, but every night. Because a person who leads others must first be someone who stands before Allah in humility. The third condition was even harder. He had to fast every day. Not for harshness, but so that he would always remember that he was a servant of justice, not someone seeking comfort for himself. After the 3 conditions were spoken, and the crowd fell silent, no one stepped forward. These were not promises that could be made lightly. Each condition was a lifelong struggle. A struggle against anger, a struggle against physical exhaustion, and a struggle against the temptation of comfort. The leader looked around the crowd. He repeated his offer a second time. Still, no one stepped forward. Everyone understood that this was not an honor. It was a burden. After a long pause, he asked a third time. Then, from somewhere in the back of the crowd, a young man stood up. He was not famous. He was not a celebrated warrior, nor was he a prominent scholar. At first glance, many people would probably not have thought he was any different from the rest. But there was something different in his eyes. Calm. When he said that he accepted those conditions, his voice did not tremble, and there was no hesitation. No sign that he was speaking words he did not fully understand. The crowd looked at him with doubt. Many thought that a young man like this could not possibly understand the weight of the promise he had just made. But the old leader looked into his face and saw something many others did not see. He saw resolve, and he accepted the young man's oath. From that moment on, that man became known by a new name. Dhul-Kifl, a name that carries the sense of someone who took responsibility upon himself and committed to fulfilling it. But there was something very few people in that crowd understood. A vow like that is not heard only by the people standing around you. It is also heard by the unseen world. There is one being who has watched humanity since the beginning of history. He's one being who searches constantly for the smallest weakness in the human heart. One being who has brought countless people to ruin with nothing more than a burst of anger or a moment of lost control. When Dhul-Kifl made his vow that he would control his anger, those words did not echo only through the crowd. They echoed somewhere else. And in that place, a being began to pay attention. Because to that being, nothing is more interesting than testing a human who has just declared that he can overcome himself. There is something human beings rarely realize when they make great promises. They think those promises are heard only in the world of people, only by the ones standing around them. But in the reality of faith, every sincere vow echoes further than that. It reaches places the human eye cannot see, places where other beings are also watching the lives of men and women. Since the first human being was created, there has been one being who has never stopped watching them. One who swore that he would do everything possible to lead the children of Adam astray. He has seen human weakness for centuries. He has watched kings who held enormous power collapse under the weight of their own greed. He has seen nations blessed with favor lose their path because of arrogance. And he has seen many people who thought they were strong, only to fall apart the moment anger took hold of them. That being is Iblis. To him, human history is like a book he has read too many times. He knows which pages usually end in failure. He knows which weaknesses tend to appear again and again in the heart of man. And in one of those weaknesses has always returned from generation to generation. Anger. Anger can destroy in seconds what a person spent years building. A man may spend his whole life building honor and integrity, but one moment of uncontrolled emotion can make it all collapse. That is why Iblis has always seen anger as one of the easiest doors through which to enter the human heart. So when the vow of Dhul-Kifl echoed in the human world, it also reached the place where Iblis was watching. A man had stood before a crowd and declared that he would not let anger control him. To many, that may have sounded like a powerful statement. But to Iblis, it felt almost like a challenge, because he knew what many people forget. Controlling anger is not easy. When the body is tired, when pressure weighs down on the mind, when a person faces repeated injustice, anger often rises as the most natural response. He had seen wise and respected people fail precisely at that point. So Iblis began to watch Dhul-Kifl. He saw this man step into his new role with a rare calmness. Every day, people came before him with disputes, complaints, and emotional stories. Some had been wronged, some argued over property, some brought with them their own rage. Every story had the power to test the patience of any leader. But Dhul-Kifl listened to each of them. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He did not let the tension of others become his own. He judged fairly and then moved on to the next case. Day after day, those around him began to realize that this man truly was different. His calmness was not an act, and it looked like an inner state he had trained for a long time. When others spoke loudly, he answered gently. When others lost patience, he remained composed. In the darkness of the unseen world, Iblis watched all of this with growing frustration. He had made men stronger than Dhul-Kifl fall. He had led entire communities astray with nothing more than whispers. But this man seemed unwilling to let those whispers touch his heart. Iblis began to understand that ordinary temptations would not be enough. A quiet whisper would not make this man angry. A single injustice would not break his calm. If he wanted to shatter the vow of Dhul-Kifl, he would need another plan. A plan more patient than usual. A plan aimed at the very limits of human nature. Because no matter how strong a human being is, the body still has limits. Exhaustion can cloud the mind. Lack of sleep can make emotions fragile. And when weariness builds up, even the strongest hearts can begin to shake. Iblis smiled when that idea came to him. If Dhul-Kifl had vowed that he would not become angry, then the best way to test that vow would not be through one great provocation, not through a direct confrontation, but through small disturbances repeated again and again at the moments when the human body is weakest. He decided to carry out this test himself, because in all his long history, Iblis had learned something important. Human beings are not always broken by great storms. Sometimes it is the tiny drops of water falling over and over that wear down the stone. The plan of Iblis did not begin like a storm. He did not appear in some terrifying form to frighten people. But he understood that the most dangerous tests often arrive in very ordinary shapes. A small complaint, a repeated annoyance, something that seems insignificant but is repeated enough times to wear away a person's calm. So he chose a form familiar to the human world. An old man, bent back, slow steps, trembling voice, like someone who had suffered too much in life. There was nothing in that appearance to make anyone suspicious. On the contrary, it inspired sympathy. One afternoon, after Dhul-Kifl had just finished a long day hearing the disputes of the people, he returned home with a body heavy from exhaustion. All day long he had listened to complicated cases, trying to maintain justice between people whose emotions pulled in opposite directions. And as the sun began to set, his body wanted nothing more than a little quiet. And that was when the knocking came. When he opened the door, he found an old man standing there. The man's face was filled with sorrow. His voice trembled as he explained that members of his own family had treated him unjustly, and that he had no one else to protect his rights. Dhul-Kifl listened carefully. Though his body was tired, he still gave the man his full attention. After hearing the story, he gently told him to return the next day during the time of judgment, and he would make sure justice was done. The old man left. The next day, Dhul-Kifl sat where he normally heard the people's disputes. One by one, they came before him, but the old man from the previous day never appeared. The day passed. Then that evening, when Dhul-Kifl finally returned home and prepared to rest, the knocking came again. He opened the door, and it was the same old man. The man said the others had promised to resolve the matter but had failed. He repeated his story with the same desperation as before. Dhul-Kifl listened again. Even after a long day of work, he calmly comforted the old man and once more told him to come the next day so the matter could be settled. But the next day, the old man did not appear. Instead, he returned again in the evening. And so it became a cycle, every day the same thing. By day, Dhul-Kifl judged the cases of the people. By evening, just as he was preparing to rest after fasting all day, the knocking would begin. Each time he would find the old man standing there with the same story, the same desperation. Dhul-Kifl already had little time for rest. By day he worked without pause. By night he prayed. And the few moments left for sleep were only narrow spaces between two great duties. And now even those moments were being cut apart again and again. The servants in his house began to worry. They could see the weariness on his face. Some days his eyes were red from lack of sleep. Sometimes his hands trembled slightly when he opened the door. They tried to stop the old man, but every time the old man would say that Dhul-Kifl had promised to help him, and Dhul-Kifl always kept his promise. He came to the door. He listened. He reassured the old man, day after day. From the outside, people saw only a patient leader, but inside, the real battle was taking place. The human body has limits. When exhaustion builds, the mind grows heavy. Small thoughts begin to grow larger. A repeated irritation can begin to stir the heart. That was exactly what Iblis was waiting for. From the shadows, he watched every moment. He watched Dhul-Kifl open the door though his body was exhausted. He watched him listen to the same story without interrupting. He watched him keep his voice calm even while his eyes were heavy with sleeplessness. And every time the plan of Iblis failed once more. But he did not give up. Because he knew that the greatest tests are not always powerful blows. They are the slow erosion of time. The repetition of small disturbances until the human heart begins to tremble. So he kept returning. The knocking came again and again. Every knock was a provocation. Every sleepless night was another step in his plan. But what Iblis did not yet understand was that some hearts are trained in patience so deeply that repeated trials do not weaken them. Instead, and they make their steadfastness even clearer. After many days of being disturbed without rest, the body of Dhul-Kifl had nearly reached its limit. No matter how strong a person may be, human beings are created with simple needs. They need rest, they need sleep, they need time to recover. But in those recent days, even those simple things had become rare. During the day, he still sat before the people to settle their disputes. Stories of injustice, complaints, and heated arguments continued just as before. He still listened to each one, still kept his voice calm, and still gave fair decisions. But when the sun went down and people left, his body became heavy, as though it carried the burden of many sleepless days. The servants in the house could not ignore it. They saw the exhaustion in his walk. They saw the redness in his eyes. And they began to fear that if this continued, even his health would fail. So one day, when Dhul-Kifl prepared to rest, they decided to guard the door carefully. They told him that this time he should rest for at least a little while, and that they would not allow anyone to disturb him during that short period. Dhul-Kifl agreed, not because he wanted to avoid responsibility, but because even a steadfast heart needs strength if it is to continue serving justice. The room where he lay down to rest was closed. The servants stood outside, determined to let no one enter. There was no knocking, no desperate voice as on the other nights. For the first time in many days, Dhul-Kifl lay down with the hope that he might sleep. But the quiet did not last. A faint sound came from inside the room, not from the door, not from outside, from within. Dhul-Kifl opened his eyes. His body was still heavy with fatigue, but his mind became alert at once. He sat up and looked around, and then he saw a familiar figure standing on the other side of the room. It was the same old man who had come knocking for so many days. But this time something was different. No door had been opened for him. No one had passed the servant standing guard outside, which meant the old man had not entered by any human way. Dhul-Kifl looked at him in silence, and in that moment the truth became clear. He asked one simple question. "You are Iblis, are you not?" The man standing before him straightened his back. The trembling vanished. The weakness of the old man seemed to dissolve, revealing a cold confidence behind the disguise. He did not pretend any longer. He admitted it. He said that all these days, it had been him knocking at the door. It was him repeating the same story. It was him waiting for the moments when Dhul-Kifl was ready to rest, only to shatter his peace. He had done it all for one reason: to make Dhul-Kifl angry. He said he had tried everything. The repeated disturbances, the false story, the sleepless nights. He believed that sooner or later exhaustion would make this man lose control. But what confused him was that it had never happened. Dhul-Kifl did not shout. He did not become angry. He did not even rise to confront him. He only looked at him with the same calmness with which he heard the disputes of the people. Then he said something very simple. He said that he had made a promise to Allah, and he would not break that promise. There was no miracle in that moment, no battle between two mighty forces, no blazing light or thunder from the sky. There was only one thing: a human being keeping his word. And in that silence, Iblis understood that he had failed. Not because Dhul-Kifl was stronger than him, not because he possessed some extraordinary power. He failed because Dhul-Kifl had conquered himself. Iblis disappeared, not because he had been defeated by force, but because there was nothing left for him to do. When a heart has resolved to stay true to its promise to Allah, the whispers of Iblis lose their meaning. The victory of Dhul-Kifl had no audience, no cheering crowd, no monument raised to remember it. But it was a victory far greater than the victories the world usually praises. Because the hardest battle a person faces is not the battle against an enemy outside, it is the battle against the self. And in that battle, Dhul-Kifl proved something many people forget. True strength is not in defeating others. True strength is in mastering your own heart. That is why his name, though mentioned only briefly in the Quran, still carries a weight that makes the listener stop and reflect. Because sometimes a life Allah mentions in only a few lines is enough to teach humanity a lesson that hundreds of pages of history could never fully capture. The greatest lesson from this story is not in the strange details of the test itself, but in what it reflects in our own lives today. Every one of us has moments of being tested by exhaustion, by injustice, by words that make the heart burn. In those moments, the natural human reaction is often anger, argument, or acting on emotion. But the story of Dhul-Kifl reminds us that true strength is not found in reacting the fastest. It is found in controlling ourselves. When we learn to stop before anger explodes, when we keep a promise even when no one sees us, when we choose calm instead of emotional reaction, these are the quiet victories that Allah sees. The world may never praise them, but in the sight of the Creator they carry immense worth. If this story made you reflect, keep walking with the Prophetic History Explained community, where we explore profound stories from the Quran, from the history of the prophets, and from the righteous people of Islamic tradition, drawing lessons that can be lived in the modern world. These stories do not only help us understand the past, they also help us understand how to live better in the present. And if you want to continue hearing more meaningful stories like this, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support the channel and help us bring even more thoughtful content in the videos ahead.